Lewis in a Black Horse pub. Well, good morning again, and time for us to look at the new front pages of the newspapers, just so that you know what's going on. But first of all, perhaps what you're always most interested in is what's the weather going to be like. Today, we're going to have light rain and a gentle breeze, and it is light rain outside. It sometimes seems to be quite heavy, but it's only sporadic. The top temperature is going to be 11 degrees, and it started off at 4. Right now it's 10 degrees, so it's nudging what's going to be the maximum for the day. That's going to hit about midday. The sad thing is that for the rest of the week it is going to be cool. Tomorrow it's going to plunge to a low or a high of 7, low of -1. Wednesday 7 and 2 degrees, 6 and 1, 5 and -2. Taking us to Saturday at 5 degrees and -1. But on Saturday, what we are going to have is a full day of sunshine without cloud. Clouding over again on Sunday, I'm afraid, with showers, nudging up a little bit to 7 degrees, but not a pretty picture. Not a pretty picture at all, I'm sorry to say. But let's take a look at the newspaper front pages. Farewell LTEL and Sunak Braverman migrant deal are the two key stories this morning. Is the Metro. Terry Venables, 1943 to 2023, it says, and it has got a full page sketch of him and says farewell Tell. Most of Monday's front pages feature a glowing tribute to former England manager Terry Venables, who died at the age of 80 over the weekend. Images of the former Chelsea, Spurs, QPR and Crystal Palace footballer adorn the front of the Metro as the paper's headlines bids farewell LTEL and looks back on his glittering career as a player and manager. The Sun goes the same way. Terry Venables, 1943 to 2023. One tell of a fella, it says, a play of words. Gaza's tribute to footy legend. Football greats share their stories and memories of Venables, who led England to the 1996 European Championship semi-finals on home soil, and the Three Lions legend Paul Gascoigne is mentioned on the front page of The Sun, with the tabloid mentioning an image he posted on social media of Venables with a cup of tea alongside the message, "Such a sad day. Cheers, boss." And that is Terry Venables, a legend. And the Star goes the same way. The Three Lions legend dies at 80, and a smiling, beaming Venables, and it says farewell to LTEL. A huge image of Venables features on the front page of the Daily Star. In the background, the image of Tottenham Hotspur, who Venables used to manage. And it holds a minute's applause before the Premier League defeat to Aston Villa on Sunday. The Daily Mirror. Wow, it goes the same way. Terry Venables, 1943 to 2023. The great showman, it says. A charismatic football star. Passionate England boss. Author. Singer, hotel and club owner, LTEL. The great showman, a huge headline on the front of the Daily Mirror. which reflects on the careers of former England, Barcelona, Australia, Tottenham, and Leeds United manager Eltel. According to the paper, Venables was not just a charismatic football star and passionate English boss. He was also an author, singer, hotel and club owner, a man of many talents. The Guardian. It goes back to the realities of the world. Hopes Israel and Hamas truce can hold as a third exchange takes place. Yes, it has Venables on the front page too, but not as the headline. The image of Venables toasting a cup of tea catches the eye on the front page of Monday's Guardian. The broadsheet also looks at the latest on the situation in the Middle East. Elsewhere, in domestic news, the paper has figures such as NHS care delays in England harmed 8,000 people and caused 112 deaths last year. An NHS spokesperson said the health service works hard to keep patients safe and says when delays do happen, trusts are required to investigate them and take further steps to further improve themselves. The Times. A stake in nuclear site seized from the Chinese could go to Abu Dhabi. There is a picture of Dr. Ephraim Mervyn, the chief rabbi and TV personality Robert Rinder, the actress Tracy Ann Oberman, the actor Eddie Moram, Rachel Riley, and the Countdown co-host, the actress Maureen Lipman, and the presenter Vanessa Feltz, who all joined forces, and that's why the writing is so small because there are so many names, all joined forces in the march against anti-Semitism in central London yesterday. Tens of thousands of presenters took part in the large demonstration of the kind, the largest demonstration of the kind in nearby Century Park. The headline, though, is Orphan Hostage 4 is set free. And sports writer Martin Samuel describes Venables as an innovative and brilliant as tributes continue in the Times. But turning to the domestic news, actor Eddie Marson, Countdown presenter Rachel Riley, I've just read out the names, joined Sunday's march against anti-Semitism in central London. The paper describes it as one of the largest demonstrations of its kind for nearly a decade. So that's one of the things that we've got going in the papers this morning, and there's a march, and the Daily Telegraph. Let's just, again, sports writer Martin Samuels describes Venables as an innovative and brilliant as tributes poured in, but the domestic news, several personalities, including Maureen Lipman, probably the best known of the lot, featured in a picture of Sunday's march against anti-Semitism in central London. The paper describes it as one of the largest demonstrations of its kind for nearly a decade. The Daily Telegraph. Sunak's deal with Braverman on migrants revealed. The Daily Telegraph splashed on Monday, and it claims Rishi Sunak has struck a deal on migrants with former Home Secretary Suella Braverman, as the paper claims he needed her support during his leadership campaign last year. The paper claims that it's seen a copy of a pact which says the Prime Minister agreed to raise the salary threshold for migrants to £40,000 from £26,000. The broadsheet adds Mr. Sunak has not denied discussing policy options with Mrs. Braverman or the existence of a document. But Downing Street has rejected any characterization of it as a deal. Elsewhere, a picture of Boris and Carrie Johnson attending the march against anti-Semitism with their son features on the paper's front pages. The Eye, tens of thousands join protest march against anti-Semitism, but its headline is millions face higher taxes until election. Health, I reversed type 2 diabetes by eating wild food. Should you use your partner's toothbrush? A lot of nonsense. But the main thing is Jeremy Hunt cannot cut a stealth tax that is dragging millions into paying a bigger rate before the general election next year. Treasury sources say. Chancellor does not have a headroom in the economy despite its drop in inflation. According to the front pages of Monday's newspaper, current public finances will not allow the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, to use the spring budget to cut a stealth tax, which the paper says is dragging millions into paying higher tax rates. Above the main story is a striking image of tens of thousands of people marching through central London in Sunday's demonstrations against anti-Semitism, as the broadsheet reflects on a weekend of hostages being released and prisoners exchanging in the Middle East. The Mail, there's a banner, William's Friends, Scobie's book is just conspiracy theories dressed up as fact. But there is a big photograph of the march on Sunday. There's no war cries, no angry chants, just solidarity with UK's fearful Jews as 100,000 march against anti-Semitism. The journalist and author and documentary filmmaker Robert Hardman has thoughts on the march against anti-Semitism and is the focus in Monday's Daily Mail as the tabloid touches on the release of a 4-year-old Abigail Edan, who has dual Israel and US nationality and who has been freed by Hamas. The paper also takes aim at new claims made in the royal family biography due out later this week. The Daily Express, yes, they've got Eltel in the banner, but as author Omid Scobie rips into the monarchy, Prince is urged to defend his family. Harry must hit out at cruel attacks on the royals. The main story on the Daily Express looks ahead to the bombshell book by royal biographer Omid Scobie, due out later this week. At the top of the masthead, the paper warns an Arctic blast is on its way as Brits are urged to brace themselves for plummeting temperatures. Financial Times, Hamas must find dozens of hostages if the truce is to be extended, says Qatar. The Financial Times reflects on a 4-day ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. The truce is due to end after Monday, and Qatari Minister Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdul Meram, Al-Thai, so much too long a name. The paper, a truce could be extended if Hamas is able to use the pause in the conflict to locate those hostages. Do I hear the ghost behind me? Right, let's go back to me, shall we? Yes, we shall. Those are the newspaper headlines, a mixture, but it's amazing how many number of papers headline with tell is Terry Venables. One other story that is not mentioned in the headlines, but is in the prominent in the earlier paper, is that Jobsworth in an area somewhere near to Blackpool, the north of England, has threatened a 90-year-old woman, and the council have backed him because she feeds the birds. And she is upset, distraught, and bemused by it, and so she should be. And may I say that Ada, our lovely cleaning lady here, who looks after me so well in the morning, was equally threatened last week by somebody from our own council. And it's about time that they looked at that. These Jobsworths do not have the power to threaten with court and fines and even imprisonment people who have broken the local civilian laws. And it's up to the chief executive and to the council leader to make that plain to them. And if these reports come in, we will start to catalogue them until something is done about them. It is wrong, it's not proper, and I'm midway through my 80s as of tomorrow, and it would upset me to be threatened that way, except I am capable of hitting back, as you can see. But we don't want that sort of thing. Yes, laws and bylaws must be respected, but there is a way of treating people who have for 90 years of their life, more than 90 years, been doing things one way and then told to do another. And it's not with these miserable little Jobsworths. They should be sacked, fired, thrown out of the council altogether. They cannot go around posing like this. There we go. That's mine. Right. Now let's look at, before we go to Normandy, let's go to, if we can find it, the episode 2 of the tiny town, and it should be here because we do want to play it to you. Here we go. We played part 1 of episode 2, and here is part 2 of episode 2 of The Bloody Past of a Tiny Town. Some of the bloodshed that has taken place in our town. So stand back.
Lewes increased in importance as the Norman occupation took hold. Not that it wasn't important before that. In Saxon times, the town had 2 mints.
And in case my pronunciation confuses you,
those are places where coins were made, not a sweet that is eaten to try to disguise what you've been drinking. The now much larger cathedral town of Chichester only had 1 mint, which not only indicated the importance of Lewes, but started a sort of battle of popularity between the 2 places. The struggle for the rights to hold assizes, for example, created a tug of war that saw Chichester hold trials for a while, only for Lewes to get them back. Lewes won. The Crown Court and Lewes Assizes are still located in the modern town, and they ain't going nowhere. Mighty though the Norman castle was, it was dwarfed by the Cluniac Priory, just across this small valley. William de Warenne, who actually fought at the Battle of Hastings, was granted Lewes, along with lots of other goodies, as the spoils of war. His wife Gundrada, a religious lady, asked for and got a sponsorship to establish the priory, just 20 years after England was conquered. Henry VIII's chief vandal, Thomas Cromwell, pulled it down in 1547. Doing the bidding of the king who had fallen out with Rome over his love life. But the workmen of the 11th century were first-class masons, and some of these buildings have lasted to this day. Look at that, almost 1,000 years old. It wasn't just Henry and Thomas who were vandals. The good burghers of Lewes did their part over successive centuries, digging up the grounds and using the stones to build their garden sheds. By the time it was destroyed, the priory dominated the Lewes skyline. Its great church was immense, and the whole complex had its own hospital, dormitories, dining hall and a wharf. Boats sailed up to the priory to carry and fetch goods. How times change. This river, the Winterbourne, carried ships and barges up to the docks in the priory. Nowadays, it would barely carry a paper boat. The priory was vitally important to the local economy, bringing in goods and attracting important visitors.
The ship would have actually come very near to the edge of where the tennis courts are. That's where, because you've got the Cockshoot river or stream which fed into the Ouse, and then yes, there would have been a wharf here from which they unloaded all the stones that they used to build the priory. Because what we see now is a lot of the infill. It's like the cavity walling of the priory. The outside, the dress stone, which is now used in places like Southover Grange, came from Carr on the Isle of Wight or from Caen, so it all had to be imported. It was a significant part of the town. It started small with only 4 monks, but over the course of about 400 or 500 years, the numbers swelled. The maximum number we had was probably about 100 monks. But the church, the big church that was built in the 14th century, was bigger than Chichester Cathedral. It was massive. It would have dominated the skyline in Lewes, so it was incredibly important. And it looked both ways. It looked inland because Lewes was the mother priory for other Cluniac monasteries in the UK, and it also looked towards Europe with its mother house in Cluny. We do a lot of education work with a whole range from tiny children up to adults to get them interested in different aspects of the priory. And the trustees of Lewes Priory Trust are very keen that it's always open and free access. And it's a beautiful place that everybody can come to. They can learn about the history, they can sit in our herb garden and contemplate. And we've just started a new kitchen garden which will grow vegetables. And again, this is for the community to get involved in. So it's very much based in the community of Lewes.
But there's nothing like a bit of competition to stir the blood of a true Lewesian. And sometime in the 15th century, a big fight is recorded between the bailiffs of the town and the prior's men in a local tavern. One of the 63 pubs that once existed in the town, no doubt. The town was walled in 1275, and a fat lot of good it did. When de Montfort's troops attacked, they swept into the town with no trouble. That then caused the town's nobility to strengthen them. They remained intact from then for some centuries, when they came down to the hammers of developers as the town grew. Entry to the town was by 3 gates, north, south and west, each now remembered through the name and a few remaining stones where the wall had been. The walls may have gone, and most of the priory. But many buildings in Lewes have stood the test of time and the vandalism of kings. This church was originally a hospice attached to the priory, and this was an early hospital from the same period. And Cromwell wasn't daft enough to pull down a Tudor manor which Henry had given as part of a divorce settlement. He kept Anne of Cleves' house for himself. Within the town walls, this building has more than stood the test of time. St Michael's was the original castle church, built about 1240. It's the parish church of the town and holds both church services and musical concerts today. There is a helmet and depiction of Sir Patrick Hamilton on one of the walls. Lewes is close to the coast and open to attack from French marauders, who regularly attacked the coast. On one occasion in the 16th century, ships sailed up the Ouse far enough for them to be spotted from inside the town. This noble knight depicted here was renowned for his courage in seeing them off. Later, revolutionary Tom Paine was married here before decamping to the Americas. And its spiral tower is one of the few surviving in the UK.
Before we disappear into the folds of one of Lewis's hostelries,
there's one more legacy from Henry's break with Rome. His successor, Queen Mary, wanted to restore the Roman Church to England, and she was very vicious towards dissenters. 17 people who refused to give up their beliefs or had read the Bible in English were seized and thrown into a dungeon in Lewes. In November 1545, they were marched up these stairs out to a stake and put in tar barrels. Burning to death in that way was a very horrible way to die. One more chapter in the bloody Lewes High Street saga. This act of savagery has not been lost in the mists of time, however. The 17 martyrs, as they're known, are remembered on November the 5th in the biggest bonfire ceremonies of any Guy Fawkes night in the world. 7 bonfire societies stage a joint procession through the town, torches blazing, effigies of Guy Fawkes and of so-called enemies of bonfire, those who have behaved badly in the year, pulled on carriages stuffed with fireworks. It's a colourful and impressive procession, but with an underlying commemoration of the 17 dead. The parade stops at the town's war memorial for the laying of wreaths to the fallen. Prayers are said. Banners extolling the names of the martyrs are held high. And rousers, or better known to us as bangers, are freely thrown around as the people march. It's a colourful parade.
and I feel underdressed, with just one of my hats to show off. But bonfire, as it's known locally, is not the only memory of bloody Lewes.
He suffered a far worse fate from a hidden foe. The Black Death.
On Bloody Red to Deadly Black. Next episode, how rats destroyed a major port and brought more historical carnage to Lewes. Until then, a bloody goodbye. Poor old Lewes. I need a drink.
Well, there we are. It's a bit of history, and we'll be bringing you a couple of 15, about 15 minute episodes each Monday, Wednesday, and Friday until the end of the series, which will be about a month's time. So if you want to know a bit more about our town and its history, by all means, tap in. Okay, now we are going in in a minute or two to go to a man in Normandy, Harry Aston, and another chat about medieval times and how we might be cooperating, but certainly benefiting from some of Harry's travels, which have been numerous. So there we are. We'll wait with bated breath. In between time, I'd just like to return to the question of these jobs worths, because they actually assume an importance which they don't have. If we want a civilized society, then those who are in charge of making sure that we behave properly have also got to be civilized, unless we are not. Now, if we abuse them, or if we have a go at them, or if we behave in an aggressive manner, of course, they must be ready to protect their position. But they cannot go around just strutting and shouting and yelling at people, and particularly older people who are not well able to fight back. That is just not on. And it is not fair, and it's not proper. And not only that, it can do an awful lot of damage. It really can do an awful lot of damage. And it doesn't seem to matter how much we rail against this and say that they shouldn't behave like this. Councils don't seem to do anything about them. They have a culture in which they encourage this. Now, is they are the first to put up notices saying we will not tolerate abuse of our staff. Don't do it, because we'll come down with a heavy hand. But they don't seem to realize that that must seep through to them. They are an employer. They are the people in charge of looking after the administration of our town. And they really must not assume that they are immune from this sort of thing, or that they can encourage it. And I have to say that while I have met some very, very nice people who work for the local council, I've hit their authoritarian ways, and the smaller they are, the more authoritarian they seem to get. But I'll tell you the group that I do love, because I come to work at it's about 6:30, 6:45 in the morning, tootling along on my motor scooter, and I pass and bump into and chat to the people who collect the waste at that hour of the morning, and they are the most delightful, most civilized, friendliest guys you could ever wish to meet. They're a pleasure to talk to. They've understood what their job is all about. But only some of the others who think that it, in some way, raises their own position and regard. It does not. It does exactly the opposite. Breaks down their esteem. It breaks down the respect we have for them. They are not people of authority. They are people who carry out the wishes of the council. Now, councils and councillors should not behave that way. And in the main, they don't. So why we allow some of their employees to behave that way, I have no idea. But it is not fair, it is not just, it is not proper. And so let's call upon our local councillors to stop it and to eradicate it. And if they want some evidence of that sort of behaviour, I can give them two separate instances. One a couple of years ago and one here and now, over the last 10 days or so. I'm very happy to do so. I doubt if they'll come looking, because the one thing they don't like is to put themselves in a position of being criticised. But criticised, they have to be. I'm just looking at a little message that cropped up on one of the local apps, and that's a good way of getting the word around. And some of these apps are excellent in putting people together, and they achieve a very, very good work in that sense. But they also are a source of people being able to be rather mean and miserable to each other, and that must be eradicated. We all have different viewpoints, and if anybody fights hard for a proper democratic process, it's this television station. We carry on about it all the time. And I'm happy to say that the figures show that our voice is gaining in strength. More and more people are using us. More and more people are watching us. More and more people are saying, hey, yes. Thank you for articulating what it is that we're thinking, and we didn't know how to really make the point. I'm gratified that we have people around the town who recognize us. As our new campaign is say hello to the man in the blue hat, because a lot of you do mention my hat as I pass by on my scooter. A lot of you do recognize that we're the people that are, yes, if you like, we're a big mouth. We roar. We criticize. But we don't do it because it makes us feel like Jobsworth, big or important. We do it in the sake of democracy, which is under threat in so many parts of the world. And you think not? Well, let me tell you, it's my ferocity at protecting democracy is because I've worked in a good many of these countries that were under authoritarian rule and supposedly have come out into the light of democracy. They've decided that they will ape a good many countries that already supposedly are democratic. And it's not a pretty sight. And the trouble is that 9 times out of 10, where a non-democratic society, when I'm afraid I can't answer that at the moment, is where democratic process is flimsy, it's under threat. And it's the little guy, it's the average citizen. It's the average citizen who suffers the most. Now, if you'll just forgive me for 1 second, because I'm not getting. I just want to make sure that that Harry hasn't been in touch, because he hasn't appeared yet in the on the screen. No, he's not here yet. Let's have a look in the junk. No, he's not there yet either. So perhaps we'll send another reminder to him, so that to make sure that he gets the right message. And there we go. It's gone off. And we'll hope that we will be seeing Harry in just a minute or two, because he's always a breath of fresh air. An Englishman in France. I'm always reminded of a series of newspaper articles. Well, actually, they were written in the French newspaper Le Figaro by a journalist called Pierre Danineau, called Major Thompson, the Adventures of Major Thompson. And Major Thompson was the Frenchman's idea of an Englishman. And very amusing they are. If you can get them, I'm sure that they're out of print now, but if you can get them in some used bookstores, I think you might enjoy having a little read of them. So that's the current state of play. I'm going to just look at the just to wait on Harry for a minute or two. I'm going to look in the inside of the newspapers. Let me read you this lady, the story of this lady. The headline reads: "Bully council threat to fine a woman at 97, 97-year-old, and she's been threatened for feeding the birds in her garden. A 97-year-old woman is too afraid to feed birds in her back garden after a bullying council threatened to fine her. Retired music teacher Anne Seago says she can't even bring herself to look out of the window of her conservatory to watch the sparrows and robins after being accused of anti-social behaviour. Council officials are said to have pursued Mrs. Seago for 2 years after a neighbour complained that pigeons and seagulls were attracted to her bird table and caused a nuisance. Environmental health officers have also been driven past her bungalow to see if pigeons are roosting on the roof. For God's sake, how do you stop pigeons roosting on your roof? Earlier this month, Mrs. Seago received a written warning from the council saying she will be issued with a community protection notice and fined £100 if she does not cease her antisocial behaviour. Now, this legislation was not meant for that. It's not meant for councils to be able to bully 97-year-olds. I'll tell you something, I would ignore, if we were up there, and we'll do it down here too, if any of this sort of thing comes to light, I would ignore anything about abusing council employees. I would go down and I would abuse them on the doorstep so they know what it's like. There is nothing like a taste of your own medicine that actually makes you think twice about spending it on other people. This poor woman, frail. There's a photograph of her. It's frail. And it's just not on. And it's not at all nice. Now, I've got Harry here. And so we're going to go to Harry. Good morning, Harry Atherton. How are you?
I'm fine, just fine. Sitting here on a rainy Normandy day. Typical English weather, I guess.
Yes, as you say, we share a lot of things in common with Normandy, and the weather is one of them. and it's pretty miserable here as well.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just, Harry, just to get your opinion, because I'm quite sure it will fall in line with mine. Is I've just been reading a story about a lady, a 97-year-old lady, somewhere in the north of England, who has been threatened with fining and all sorts of other dire things by her local council for feeding the birds in her garden, not in the street, not in the park, in her garden. They've been threatening her. And she's all shook up about it, and I don't blame her. And the reason that I spotted it particularly was our cleaning lady, Ada, who's left here, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes ago, was threatened the other day by a job's worth from this council for putting out a box of toys for the bin men to collect. And quite often the bin men take these things, they restore them, and they give them away to charity. And I think that councils go over the top on this sort of thing. What would your feeling be?
Well, I think we're living in an age where the people who govern us think they have to introduce a new law of some sort, constraining our activities every 5 minutes. And a typical example of that is the European Union, which hands out 2,000 new regulations every month of one sort or another to justify their existence. So it puts society in a straitjacket. But that's how these people feel useful and want to get their names on some obscure law, obviously one about feeding pigeons in the park or whatever it is you're referring to there. And there is an old law, I think, about feeding crows in the park. Crows are a protected species, but there's something to do with feeding the crows because it's a law that goes back to when roofs were thatched, and the crows would therefore gather and peck away at the thatching and remove the neighbor's roof. So in feeding the crows, you encourage their presence and therefore the ultimate destruction of your neighbor's roof. So there is some sort of an obscure law in Britain about feeding crows. Now, as we know, laws in Britain, with a non-constitutional country, they're simply on the statute book. So these laws sit there forever unless somebody makes a point of repealing them. I was always impressed when, as recently as 1953, we repealed the law for stealing more than a shilling or a sheep. But you could until 1953. I can't remember when capital punishment was banned in Britain, but until then, you could theoretically be hanged for stealing more than a shilling. I always kept at 11 pennies myself. I never stole any more, just in case.
I make the observation that you see signs all over the place from employers, including councils, we will not tolerate our staff being abused. They don't seem to mind turning it the other way around. I don't see any signs up saying our staff will not abuse our customers or those that we are charged with looking after.
No, well, of course, I mean, when we've got laws, when laws become too prolific, they tend to lose their value, and the more laws there are, the more the tendency is to disobey them. And what's happening, I think, in modern society, this is again just purely a personal point of view, is that we're over-administered. There's a progressive lack of freedom. There's both legal limits to our behavior and self-imposed limits on our thoughts. Even this whole woke movement is a frightening thing. It's Orwellian because it's even telling us how we should think and how we should react. I do really feel we're living the decline of civilization as we have known it for many years. But then again, people of our age, Keith, have always said that. And the new waves of youth come up with new hopes and put things back on track, hopefully. So we tend to take a jaundiced view as we reach some of these magical figures on the human scale. So we tend to be a little bit negative in our declining years, and we really perhaps shouldn't be. But it would be a better world if they stopped making bloody rules about what we can and can't do, and just allow common sense behavior to direct how we behave, how we
Yes.
link with other people, how we care, and yeah.
The authority does tend to treat us like children.
Absolutely, and if treated like children, you become a child.
Exactly. You respond to that.
Yes.
Harry, if this country, and I don't know whether France has been riven quite the same over the Hamas affair, but there is a great feeling of anti-Semitism that has grown up. But on Sunday, they estimate that over 100,000, including a large number of famous names, joined a march in London that attracted over 100,000 people to support anti-Semitism laws. Is it the similar situation in France?
Yes, indeed it is, and it's refreshing to see that there's a reaction to the extreme nature of the, and I say extreme nature, of the pro-Palestinian protest marches, which managed to suck in a large number of people who you wouldn't expect to be supporters of a terrorist organization, and therefore looked very impressive at the time. And of course, great emphasis was placed on the fact that these were British people protesting, but they're British by nationality, by absorption, not by assimilation. But they're certainly not British in their minds and in their values. And therefore, there's Newton's third law: to each action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. There, it's very gratifying to see that so many hundreds of thousands, I don't know whether it was in the millions of people, are now coming out into the streets to represent not British nationality, but British values. And I think this problem will only, don't think it's going to go away. We've gone too far down that track now, but I think it will only be softened, mitigated by when we stick with what we have always thought was the meaningful values that Britain embodied. And I think they're still there, but they're a little bit hidden. But the Brits are fairly slow to react very often in these things. They're not an impulsive people. They're not Latins. They've got a character which is more benign and takes a while to. You've really got to knock over a guy's pint twice before he gets really upset. You know?
Now, last week, or possibly the week before, you made a very astute comment, because the English language is ripped apart quite often today by various groups, and we use the term left, right, middle road in politics. But you pointed out that, for instance, somebody who is dubbed as right-wing, such as Marine Le Pen, is really, in the scheme of things, not that far right. And Denmark has just elected a, quote, right-wing prime minister. And from my reading of him, he's not that far right. How do we wend our way through the maze of terms that they use in politics nowadays?
Well, I think, first of all, the term right and left, you've got to determine where the center point is. And the center point in politics in Britain is roughly in the middle, about where it should be. The center point of politics in France is way to the left. Now, what does that mean? It means that anybody who is to the right of the center point, which is to the left, is considered right. And if you're in the middle, by that time, you've become extreme right. So there already is a bias as to where the center is. An interesting country is the United States, where I think the balance is to the right. even the right-wing side of the Democratic Party are still fairly right-wing. So their center point is to the right. The center point in France is way to the left. It's reflected in some amazing statistics which we come across from time to time. You and myself as purveyors of the news, and therefore supposedly influencers, and they know with this scandalous left-wing stance of the BBC at the moment. But we have a tremendous responsibility to make sure that we keep in the middle ground and keep a balanced point of view. Now, in France, for instance, there are 28 schools of journalism. They attach normally to major universities and what have you. You can go to university and study journalism. Now, out of the 28 schools of journalism in France, word is that you cannot graduate unless you're left-wing. Therefore, many reporters and many journalists who now become very successful in France admit to having submitted their papers, submitted their reports, their exams and what have you, by taking a left-wing bias when in their hearts they were right-wing. But to graduate, they had to pretend to be left-wing. That's how deeply scarred France is by its revolution. It's never really gotten over it. So it's an extreme left-wing country. Now, if you talk about extreme right-wing, Marine Le Pen, she is nowhere near extreme right-wing. She has become, in fact, the representative of the workers. The Socialist Party in France has discarded the workers and has become the party of the immigrants. It too has become a Hamas party in many ways. So you get this ridiculous state of affairs where Marine Le Pen is considered extreme right-wing, and she is the leader of the Workers' Party. Most of the support from what was the Front National, it's called Rassemblement National now, have come from the working class.
Mm.
So it's hardly right-wing.
Yeah. One of the interesting things, I think, that in our discussions is that every Friday we have Melissa Conti, who is a very successful and middle-of-the-road journalist from New York. And she is worried because she thinks that the American populace, American electorates, aren't really attracted to either right or left, but rather attracted to personalities, and that those personalities have taken America right off any sort of railroad of political advancement.
Well, I think you're entirely right. And one of the problems is that we hear the masses say, oh, well, I really like so-and-so. Now, that could be a film star, it could be a politician or somebody. But how can they like or even dislike that person? They may like what the person does, how they perform, how capable they are at performing whatever job they've got. But you can't like a person until you've met them and felt them and got to know them and determined that people like. And the whole thing is, when you get points of view, you like it, or I don't see how you can until you become more intimately involved in the person or the idea that is being put forward. Yes. But however, that's fan clubs for rock stars or you name it. It's a tendency, I think, of human beings to look for a point of reference and to associate them perhaps with people who have succeeded and maybe reflect their hidden dreams of by being linked to that person, they themselves feel the better for it. But you hear people saying, I don't like this person. Well, on what basis do they not like him? Is it because they disagrees with their politics or disagrees with the roles they play in the movies, or the villain of the piece in the movies, the good-looking guy, gets the girl at the end of the film? Do we like him? But do we dislike the person who plays the role of the evil character? It doesn't matter. In real life, there may be lovely people. Some of the horror, apparently Boris Karloff, who was an awful man, portrayed murderous intent in the whole series and film career was the most gentle person on the planet. And again, I don't know. I never met him. Anyway, there we go. So.
Yes. I think before we get off the political scene, because it is of great interest, I think, at the moment, particularly since there are elections all the way around next year, is that in the United States, the two established parties totally lost their way, both of them. They were more interested in party than they were in electorate. And that's what caused the advent of Donald Trump to begin with. And that they haven't learned their lesson, and it looks as if there is a very strong possibility that Donald Trump may return. And now, do you see that in other parts of the world, that the political parties have lost touch with their electorate to the point where something radical will happen?
Well, absolutely. I mean, you've got the typical example in Britain at the moment, where the Conservative Party, you have the Parliamentary Conservative group, and they've totally lost contact with the Conservative Party. They do not reflect the views of the people who voted them in. And certainly, therefore, they don't reflect the views and worries, the needs of the nation. Once they're elected, they become a body unto themselves and become and just don't pay any sort of attention. You've got at the moment, what's happening? We've got Rishi Sunak in power. Probably a nice enough guy. I don't know. Again, I don't know the guy, so I mean, I can only judge by what we hear about him. But he was certainly not the choice of the Conservative Party when he put himself up for leader, and the Conservative Party membership across Britain voted to elect a new leader. They elected Liz Truss, but she didn't suit the Conservative elite in Westminster, so she was booted out unceremoniously. They just set a series of booby traps, and she was kicked out. But now we're seeing that many of her policies that she proposed, in fact, are exactly the medicine that Britain needs. But you've got a prime minister who was not in touch or elected democratically by the members of his own party. It was the Conservative Party and closed shop operation that put him in power. And so once you get that sort of a situation where a huge segment of the voting voter mass is ignored, as it was in the United States, Middle America was just forgotten by virtually all the major political the two major political parties in the States. And that Middle America finally rose up. And when a rabble-rouser comes along, whether he's called Hitler or whether he's called Trump, will harness that latent fury and be catapulted into power. So it was the neglect of the ruling class that created the electoral base for Donald Trump, just as it was neglect of the people of Germany after World War I that led to the rise of Hitler and many of the other leading German politicians, one of whom survived and became the supreme leader, Hitler. But that's created by external forces, and very often created by neglect, by leaving a vacuum that some smart cookie, Donald Trump, let's not forget that, he found that and he harnessed it. Quite a dislikable person from my point of view, but then again, don't really know the guy, but it's not the kind of guy that I'd like to go and have a beer with. But you could fully understand how he got to where he is. And so with politics having been polarized, we then can't turn back the clock and say, well, how did that happen? Because apathy and certainly neglect by the ruling elite in both parties allowed that to happen. We don't listen to the people. We do not live in a democracy. We live in a technocracy, I believe.
Absolutely. I mean, that is this television station doesn't ask about the rights or wrongs of anybody's policies necessarily, unless they're a way out. What we urge is that we get back to a democratic process, which is being eroded, not with us just in Britain, but in large parts of the world. And that really has got to stop. because otherwise we will become an encapsulated populace all the way around.
I think so. And then, of course, you've got the other dynamic that applies in politics, which is the swing of the pendulum, which you might call it from left to right, but just simply the swing of the pendulum because of other influences. And in Europe at the moment, you've got an enormous swing to the right. Most of the parties in the ascendancy in the major European nations are moving to the right. We've just seen that in Holland, in the Netherlands, I should say. And we're about to see it in Spain, most certainly. We're seeing it in Austria, where the most popular party is right wing, or at least in the polls they are for the moment. And we already have that in Poland and Hungary. France, I think, will eventually swing so-called right to Marine Le Pen or somebody like her. Though, as I've just said earlier, I don't see that she's particularly right wing, but she will appear right wing to the French, and so there's a general tendency to move in that direction. And so I think we're going to see major changes happening in Europe. What they're going to do is not to quit Europe like Britain did. They're going to try to influence it from the inside. And I think all of the nonsense, ridiculous laws and woke policies and excessive green policies and things like this that are impoverishing everybody, I'm pretty sure we're going to see some major changes over the next 5 to 10 years in the European structure.
Yes, I think you're right. I think you're right. I think politicians must not take the electorate as fools, as they often do.
Yeah, I think we're in for some major changes, and I think they'll come rapidly because there's only change can happen slowly, but when it reaches a breaking point, it comes very, very, very rapidly, almost in revolutionary terms.
Yes,
you know, there's an old expression. I think it's George Bernard Shaw said that reasonable men accept unreasonable things, whereas unreasonable men do not. Therefore, all change is due to unreasonable men. So when it's got too far and you can't, the system is about to break, unreasonable men appear on the scene again, taking us back to Trump, taking us back to other changes, major changes in political history. It's done because it's stretched too far. We have the situation. Now, this is a dangerous subject. I'm going to walk onto a minefield here, and that
Yes.
is with immigration.
Yes.
We've gone too far, too fast. We're changing the nature of these of countries, not just Britain, but France too has got tremendous problems where whole segments of the major cities, parts of the major cities, are now no-go areas because they
Well,
govern.
given the Danish election, this recent Danish election is said to have reflected the Danish people's view on immigration as well. And we tend not to think of some of those smaller countries.
Well, that's very interesting because Denmark is a country, if we take the center of politics in Denmark, it is very much to the left. Denmark is a left-wing country in terms of its political thinking. And yet even they have realized that enough is enough, and they're bringing the shutters down, and they're going to try and they'll be acting quite a number of what people would call right-wing policies. I don't think the right-wing. I think it's self-preservation. If they want to keep the character, the nation of which you're part, if you want to dilute that and change it, become another nation, bearing in mind that, gosh, I'm getting even further into dangerous territory now. But at the present rate of growth, what will the national religion of Britain be in 50 years' time? It's frightening to think, and certainly parts of some of the big cities and in the Midlands and in the north, there are laws enacted which are not British laws, but they are religious laws. And
Yes.
so the nation is changing before our very eyes. Is that a good thing? I don't know. We'll be gone. We'll never see that. But
No, we won't.
certainly, it will not be the Britain into which we were born.
No, and I am sceptical of that, as indeed I think you are, probably.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, I missed that.
So go on, Harry.
Sorry, I missed your questions, Keith.
No, I didn't ask a question. I said I'm sceptical of the fact that the Britain of the 50 years' time will be the Britain into which we were born.
Well, I think it's changed enormously in our lifetimes, and it will, and maybe change is essential. Maybe you can't stand still, and of course, in the context of Britain changing, we almost tend to think of that as a constant, and the way that Europe is a constant. But the center of the world is no longer on a London-Berlin axis. It long ago swung over to an American Pax Americana as a Pax from a Pax Britannica, but the center of the world now is somewhere in the middle of the South China Sea. We are, our period in the sunshine is over. I mean, we're and we seem to be accelerating it as fast as possible by engaging in policies which weaken us both economically, spiritually, and I won't use another word. But the world, the future of the world is not in Europe and not in the West. It's somewhere else. As I say, I won't even give a country. I'll talk about the middle of the South China Sea is now the center of the world.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, okay. I think that as usual, I asked you for your very astute analysis, and you've given it, and it is astute. And I think that it's worth putting out to our viewers. What I think we should now turn to is our plans for a combination and association with one of the great festivals that your town holds.
Yes, indeed. Well, we're an historical town, as indeed is Lewis. I've been giving some more thought to the possibility of pursuing a relationship progressively. I mean, twinning the two towns is a major step, as you say, and is certainly beyond our mandate. The only thing that disturbs me at the moment is the comparative size of the two towns. Lewis is quite a major conurbation, and you did give me the population figures, I think, last time, whereas we're relatively small, but we're similar in history. There's lots of common ground, and a very good way to put out feelers is to bring the different associative groups in each town in contact with each other to see how that common ground can be exploited. Yes. Now, exploited not just to give us a warm feeling in our trousers, but simply to exploit it for benefit. There we mention that awful word, commercial benefit. But if it brings business, tourism, and activity, yes, commercial activity, that's very good, and everybody benefits from that. So it shouldn't be for just purely altruistic reasons. It needs to have some sort of economic benefit, which I think is there.
Indeed, I think it would. Yeah. You mentioned actually I've been putting out feelers, and those people who get enthusiastic about these sort of things most in our town are the round table type of operation. I've been gently looking into that. I think we've got two organizations here who do quite a good job. They organize the raft race, for instance, and they organize a Skittles week and that sort of thing. They seem to be probably the first port of call, but I'm a little reluctant to do it until I'm absolutely sure what the organization is in your town is the most prominent.
Well, you've mentioned Round Table. You've got the Rotary. I'm sure you have the Rotary there. That's a worldwide organization. The strongest group of that kind in Domfront, in our little town, is the Lions Club, which is again a universal operation. They're very active. They do lots of good work for charity, and they're not the only one. We have quite a number of organizations, but I would think the Lions Club, and it usually gets the same kind of people involved, a cross section of society, who have the right attitude, the right ambitions. I think there certainly could be a link there, even if they're not the same organizational structure that exists in Britain. I think the Lions Club exists in Britain, does it not? Do you have a Lions Club?
Yes, indeed, it does. I mean, my experience of these organizations is that they are quite happy if it's an issue for the community to be cooperative. And I think that, and actually, I don't think we need to worry too much about the difference in size, because actually, is okay. Lewes may be 8 or 10,000 more than your town, but that's all. The figure of 100,000 that's banded around is the political boundaries, which includes half a dozen towns. So if we're talking strictly Lewes, which I think we are, is that we would be much closer in size and organization and indeed tradition to each other than you might think. And I think that the strength of our charitable organizations is one that we should play on.
Well, I think so, and you're quite right. I think the population imbalance isn't too much of a problem. A town near us, Ferté-Massé, is twinned, which has a population of about 12,000. Is twinned with Ludlow in Shropshire, which has a population of 100,000, and it seems to work extremely well. And then the second overlay is the fact that many British towns are much, much bigger by nature because of Britain being a highly populated country in terms of the floor space, and as opposed to France. So the large French towns rarely tend to go over 30 or 40,000. You've got the big centers, Bordeaux, Marseille, Lyon, and Paris, of course, where you get into the hundreds of thousands, or Paris million. But major towns, the capital of our department, Alençon, is a town of about 50,000 people. Barely, maybe not even that. And yet it's the capital of a whole county, as it were. A department, you call them counties, we call them departments. Yeah.
Yes. Well, in fact, Lewes town is the county town of East Sussex.
Yeah.
So equally, we've got quite a small organization, a small conurbation, that is, in theory, anyway, the administrative centre of the entire, I want to say province, county of East Sussex. And it actually is quite proud of that nomenclature. So I think that we're not too far apart, and I think we'll find a lot of things in common. And I think perhaps now we should start to ask. But our main thrust is to see whether we can get an initial thing going with your medieval festival, which takes place next year, 2024, and in August, I believe.
Well, that's correct. Well, I'll talk to the organizers and see, if what they see as common ground, and let's pursue it there. If we can get a leading light on either side to who carry can carry the public attention with them, I thought maybe we could get Anne Hathaway to represent you. Could we? Or,
why not?
Well, I'm sure she's still in one of the back rooms in that little house. Get her to put down her knitting and come out and lead us.
Of course, Lewes as such, Lewes started out probably in any sort of recognition before writing was that commonplace in 800 with Alfred the Great giving it a market and a town. but it really is its most formative years were, of course, completed by Normans. So there is probably the de Varennes that you rightly identified as being really the first lord, still hold a great deal of sway in terms of their fondness or otherwise here. So I think the Norman angle is certainly something that we can find as a joint commitment.
I think we could. And de Varennes, of course, endeared himself to the local populace by, did I tell you the story? Well, it's an alleged story about when William the Conqueror was called back to Normandy because the Duke of Brittany had getting a bit stroppy and he had to go and sort him out, as he did from time to time. He left de Varennes in charge. And while William was gone, some of the people thought it was the opportunity to create problems. So they rose up against the new regime, and de Varennes put it down with great brutality. He allegedly cut off the right foot of 20,000 people. Now, whether that's true or not, I'm not sure, but it's a legend. When William came back and he saw all these people hobbling around, he said, "Well, what happened here?" He said, "Well," he said, "I cut off their right foot, squire, because they were no longer loyal to you." He said, "That's a good piece of work." And so he gave him even more land and allowed him to build your castle, you see, which is a lovely castle. Yes. And poor old de Warenne, or at least his descendants, they eventually died out intestate, and the lands of Lewis passed to the Howard family in Arundel, the Dukes of Norfolk. But that's another story. But yes. No, de Varennes certainly left his mark. And yes. Are there any one-legged people?
I haven't noticed them hobbling much.
Hobbling around, yeah.
No, but of course, one of the ties is that we still are rather proud, even though it is mostly ruins now, the priory, which Garuda de Varennes founded in as early, some people believe, as 1069. Yes, and she did that because she said to Bill, "Bill, I feel like a weekend away. Let's pop over to Normandy," which they did. And then they, because she was a very religious woman, she said, "Let's go and knock on the door of the Pope and say hello." And they started out towards Rome, only to find a local war in the way. And so she veered off, and they stayed in a Cluniac priory for a little while. And she was so impressed by it. I mean, she said, "Okay, Bill, let's go back and build one." And it's said that William the Conqueror, whom she was either sister or sister-in-law, you're not absolutely sure which, said, no, I'm not having any of that rubbish. And so she went down several times and had Sunday afternoon tea, as relatives do, and she talked him into it. And was able to start the priory, which dominated the town for almost 500 years before Henry VIII came along with the dissolution of the monasteries and pulled it down. So actually, there is a lot of tradition and a lot of history between our two areas of the country.
And indeed there is. And of course, going back even earlier than the Norman period, you've got the tremendous influence of the Druid religion, which was common to both sides. Both from the Brittany link with Cornwall, interesting enough, a common language. The people still speak Breton, the Brittany language, and the last person in Cornwall was an old lady who died when I was a little boy, who still spoke Breton. She'd never left Cornwall, but she still spoke. That was the common language. So the commonality of language between the two places. So there is a very strong link that goes back before Norman times. And your reference to William, of course, who was initially antipathetic to the church, to the Christian church, eventually came on board in a big way because Unfortunately, because there was clouds surrounding his birth, he was known initially as William the Bastard,
Yes.
because he was illegitimate. And so his brother, who had become bishop, I think, of Bayeux or whatever, decided to intervene with the Pope, and see if they couldn't find some papers as to whereby his parents had been married after all, so that he would become known as William, just simply William, and then, of course, eventually William the Conqueror when he conquered Britain, England. And so to do that, he built abbeys to impress the popes, founded Mont Saint Michel as a gesture. And so the Pope said, well, he must be a good lad. And he looked in the bottom drawer, found the papers, and William lost this unfortunate title that had carried since his birth. So
Yes.
he did get into building, both he and his wife, Mathilde, they have beautiful convents built here in Caen, which is the capital of Lower Normandy, and as a memory to their role and active role in supporting the church.
Yeah, indeed, and I mean the various things that have made their mark in history. I mean, he was pathological, was he not, about Hereward the Wake?
Oh, indeed, yeah. So no, but one has to remember also, Keith, that in those days the role of the church was very, very important. I mean, it was a tremendous power, both economically and morally, and they decided, on many things. Here in Domfront, we have, of course, the little church, Notre-Dame-sur-Lot, which is where the negotiations took place to reinstate Henry II into the church after he had been excommunicated as a result of the Becket murder at Canterbury. And he was banned from the church, excommunicated, and then negotiated here to have him reinstated. So you can see the power of the church, even on powerful monarchs like somebody like Henry II. So
Indeed.
the enormous role played by the church right until recent times, and certainly in Catholic countries like Ireland and in Quebec, where I used to live for quite a number of years. The power of the church has waned, but it's still, if you want for a loan at the bank in Quebec, not too many years ago, the bank manager would determine if you were a good Christian and check with the local priest before you get your bank loan. Now that's
Harry, can you hold that thought? I have to let Eliza Page in, who comes on after you, and I'm alone here at the moment.
I'm always fascinated by the way Keith does a wonderful job. He seems to be a one-man band, and he's chief doorman, chief bottle washer, and it's the vacuum cleaner salesman, I think. Oh no, I shouldn't say that. Maybe somebody's important. I can see somebody coming in, perhaps the new guest. Now here he is back again. But it's amazing, isn't it? What a job he does. He does everything. I mean,
well, Harry, I was always very impressed because you will recall that when we first met, that I was actually serving a Canada Council fellowship in the theatre. And one of the jobs that I had was a tour manager taking Romeo and Juliet up and down the length of British Columbia. And we went to Prince George, and the local television man said, "We'd love to have you on. Would you come?" So I took this actress, or a couple of actresses actually, and along we went to be interviewed. And the chap opened the door. And he sort of said, "Sit down over there." And then he wheeled the camera around, and then he interviewed us. And then he said goodbye, and we said, well, look, can we take you for a drink or a coffee or something? He said, oh, no, I have to sweep up and make the place tidy. So next one, and there was only him there. And I thought, if it can be done here, it can be done anywhere. So that was my model.
So that was back in the days of Ben Ginter, was it? You remember Ben Ginter? He opened the brewery in Prince George.
Yes, that's right.
It was one of the first so-called cottage breweries, which competed with the big names, and made a great success of it. But in those days, I remember first going to Prince George. I think it would be in the mid-60s, and there was still dirt. The main street was still a dirt road.
Yes, indeed. They were still small towns.
Very prosperous town now. And I remember I got out of my car and there was an old geezer hobbled up with one of these knotted, canes. And he looked at me and he said, "You're from the big city, lad." I said, "Yes, I am, Vancouver." And he said, "You should be indoors by 6 o'clock here." And he said, "Because it's a sinful city." My recollections of Prince George. Yes. Poor old Ben Ginter and his brewery. He's long gone.
Well, I remember being trapped in Golden, which was in those days Golden by name, but not by nature. And I had to wait in the train station until about 4 o'clock in the morning to get a train out of there. And it was just like in the heat of the night. In which Sidney Poitier is trapped in a train station overnight in this small backwoods town. And I sat on tenterhooks all night because the reputation was that the cowboys came in from time to time and shot the place up.
Oh, well, no, I've seen that. I mean, cowboys, not nowhere near as far north as Prince George. But mind you, thinking of distances here, Prince George, when you consider it's about 400 or 500 miles from Vancouver, and you're only halfway up British Columbia.
That's right, indeed.
So, you get the sheer size of Canada. It's quite amazing.
Yes.
And,
just one memory is I can share with you, which most people find interesting, and that is that there is a railway line between Prince George and Prince Rupert. And the road runs alongside it for much of the time, of the length of it, which is about 100 miles or so. And there are towns, but nobody living in them. But they are all maintained. Is all the way along this line, and it's because the towns were built on the anticipation that with the railway line would come mass immigration, which never transpired. So the towns are there, and Prince George and Prince Rupert are the two major towns, and nothing in between.
Yes, I can quite see that. And going back to my times, my youth in British Columbia, there was some very sad stories up near Ashcroft, for instance, beginning of the Caribou Trail, heading up towards Prince George and through Canal and onto Prince George. There were towns that were just ghost towns because all the men had left to fight in the First World War. And in the meat grinder that followed, or the War of the Trenches, they never came back. And these towns just sit there because the male population had gone, so the women then moved on to other centers. And one particularly near Ashcroft. So the tremendous demographic shift in British Columbia has always been noted. There's a very rude story that I cannot tell on family television about Prince George and Prince Rupert. I'm trying to think if there's any polite way I can tell this story, but I don't think there is. Maybe privately. One of the titles that Prince George used to have it was known as the a-hole of the world. If you follow me, and yes. Prince Rupert was considered to be a further 200 miles up it. But anyway, that's as politely as I can tell that story. Anyway, but back to the good old days of our youth in British Columbia. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, Harry, as usual, fascinating having you with us. We will now, we've taken one small step forward in our plan for
Indeed.
an association with next August's medieval festival, and perhaps is Anne Law, I think it was, wasn't it, who is the tourist lady you had on.
We'll get her involved. And she and Anne Hathaway should get on well together. So
indeed.
Yeah.
But notwithstanding, I think that perhaps next week, if you don't mind, is you spend a few minutes just outlining what the medieval festival entails, and what there is that happens, and why it should be so intriguing.
Well, I'll talk to the people who organised that in the course of the week, and maybe you and I can exchange a private call, or
Indeed.
Bring everything up to date, so we've got all our ducks in a row for the many millions who watch this program, and we shall then be able to say something intelligent for a change.
Yes. Incidentally, you did get my note about the increase in viewers, did you?
Oh yes, indeed I did.
Yes.
You are
encouraging.
You are a man of amazing talent. I don't know how you handle it all. I mean, you put a circus juggler to shame. You keep so many balls in the air at the same time. Yes. So
Harry, good to talk to you.
You too.
And we'll talk privately, but we'll certainly be with our viewers next Monday.
Okay, with pleasure. Okay, Steve. Cheers now. Bye.
Bye, Harry. Bye.
Bye.
Who's behind us? Is there anyone we should track? Oh, it's Michael, is it? Right. Okay. Well, in that case, what we're going to do is we're going to take a 5-minute break or so, and then be back with Liza Page, who you probably saw in the background, has just arrived, full of vinegar and something, and ready to take on the world. So let's just we will say a goodbye, and here we go.